Private Ethan Carver stepped onto the tarmac of Naval Base Coronado with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, chest puffed out like a man who believed he had already conquered the world. Boot camp had ended just weeks ago, and he carried with him the kind of confidence only a young recruit could muster, the kind that bordered on arrogance. He had been drilled, disciplined, and bruised by instructors who wanted him to understand that the Navy was about more than brute strength. Yet in his mind, he was ready for anything. He had learned a few hand-to-hand combat moves, a couple of tactical drills, and he knew the regulations, or at least enough to make him feel invincible. The gates of the base loomed ahead. He could see the towering fence, the barbed wire catching the afternoon sun, and the guards stationed with professional detachment. His heart thrummed with a mix of nerves and anticipation. Today wasn't just another day. Today, he would prove himself. Today, he would assert authority and show that he wasn't just another nervous recruit fumbling his way through the Navy. Ethan had always been drawn to the idea of control. Whether in sports, school, or casual street encounters back home, he thrived on being the one in charge, the one everyone watched. It wasn't malice. It was ego, pure and unfiltered. And here, at the threshold of one of the most secure military installations in the country, he felt the opportunity to assert that control in a real situation had finally arrived. The base gate approached, and through the heat haze he spotted someone walking toward him. At first he didn't think much of it, just another pedestrian, maybe a visitor or an officer late for a meeting. But as she came closer, something about her caught his attention. She was petite, almost deceptively fragile-looking, yet she moved with a calm precision that seemed out of place. Her steps were measured, her posture flawless, and she carried herself with an air of authority that made Ethan's instincts flare. He smirked. Maybe she thought she could just stroll through the gate without showing respect. He was ready to step in, to assert himself, to show that he was the one who enforced order here. He clenched his fists, feeling a strange surge of adrenaline in his chest, and approached her, striding with purpose. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called, trying to sound commanding. "You can't just walk through here like this. Identification, please." She paused, looking at him for the first time. Her eyes were sharp and steady, not the least bit surprised or intimidated. "I don't have it on me right now," she said calmly, "but I'm authorized to be here." Her voice was smooth, measured, with no hint of panic. Ethan's confidence swelled. How dare she speak to him that way? Who did she think she was? He leaned in slightly, putting his hand on her arm, a gesture that, in his mind, asserted control but, in hindsight, was the first fatal mistake of the day. The senior guard at the gate, Petty Officer Lujan, caught sight of the interaction from a few meters away. His eyes narrowed. He knew exactly who the woman was. He had seen her walk through the base countless times, but he stayed back, curious to see how this clueless recruit would handle the situation. Ethan ignored the faint warning that went off in his gut. This was his moment, his chance to shine. "Step aside, ma'am. You need to follow protocol." His voice was firm, perhaps too firm, trembling slightly with excitement. The woman's gaze didn't waver. Instead, she studied him, her expression calm but piercing. "I suggest you step back," she said again, this time with a subtle edge. Ethan misinterpreted it as defiance, a challenge to his authority. In an instant, his overconfidence collided with her composed presence. He lunged forward, attempting to assert dominance, to physically restrain someone he assumed was just a civilian trying to flout regulations. But she didn't flinch. Her body moved with lightning precision, almost before he had fully committed to the action. He felt a sudden, shocking pressure on his wrist as her grip locked in place. It wasn't a struggle. She didn't need to fight him. Her control was absolute. Panic flashed across his mind as he realized that this woman was no ordinary person. He tried to pull free, but her stance was unyielding. Every muscle in her body was taut with trained readiness, every motion calculated for maximum efficiency. Time seemed to slow. Ethan's mind raced, thinking about the humiliation he would suffer, the embarrassment of failing in front of guards and fellow recruits. but he couldn't break free. It was as though his body had betrayed him, frozen under her gaze and grip. The senior guard finally intervened, rushing over with a mixture of concern and barely concealed amusement. "Private Carver, step away," he barked, but even his voice couldn't mask the awe he felt at the display of skill in front of him. Ethan's face burned red with humiliation and confusion. His arrogance had evaporated in an instant, replaced with raw, humbling disbelief. He had gone from thinking he was in control to being utterly powerless, all within a single heartbeat. The woman, calm and measured, finally released his wrist. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't even raise her voice. She simply stepped back, her posture still commanding, her eyes locked on his. "You followed your instincts," she said softly. "That's good, but instincts without discipline are dangerous." Ethan stared at her, speechless, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He had come to the base full of bravado, ready to prove himself, and now he felt like a child caught in a moment far beyond his understanding. This was a lesson he hadn't expected, delivered in a way he would never forget. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispers, chuckles from other recruits, and the lingering impression of the woman who had just reduced his ego to ashes. Little did he know, this encounter was only the beginning of a story that would reshape his understanding of strength, discipline, and respect. Lieutenant Commander Raina Hale turned, continuing toward her business without another word, leaving Ethan to sit in stunned silence. He knew one thing for certain. He had just met someone unlike anyone he had ever faced before, and the day had only just begun. Lieutenant Commander Raina Hale moved through the base like a shadow, her footsteps measured, precise, and unhurried. She had returned from a classified evaluation mission in a remote training zone, a week-long operation that had tested her limits physically, mentally, and emotionally. Her mind, sharp as a scalpel, was still processing every detail, every movement she had executed flawlessly in hostile environments. But now, the world outside the mission had its own kind of tension, and she felt it immediately at the base gate. The air was thick with the heat of mid-morning sun, the faint hum of engines from the nearby aircraft, and the low murmur of guards chatting among themselves. Raina could sense the energy before she even saw him, the recruit, clearly inexperienced, standing with that telltale mix of pride and anxiety that came with inexperience. He was trying too hard to be in control. That kind of tension always preceded mistakes. Private Ethan Carver had no idea what he was up against. From his perspective, the situation was simple: an unidentified civilian approaching the gate, a perceived threat and a duty to act. What he didn't see was the calm authority radiating from the woman in front of him. Her posture was impeccable, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the area without haste, every micro-movement deliberate. She could have taken him down in a heartbeat, yet she made no aggressive motion. "Step back," she said again, her voice soft but unwavering, carrying the weight of someone who had commanded men in battle zones, someone who had faced danger hundreds of times more lethal than a nervous recruit. Ethan blinked, confusion flashing across his face. I can't let you just." His voice trailed off, unsure how to finish. He felt his palms sweat beneath the gloves of bravado he had wrapped around himself since arriving at the base. Every instinct told him he had to assert authority, yet the calm confidence of the woman made him hesitate. The senior guard, Petty Officer Lugin, had been watching from a distance. He didn't move immediately. He wanted Ethan to learn, though not this way. He had a front-row seat to a classic scenario: overconfidence versus experience. Lugin's eyes flicked between the two, reading the tension in Ethan's posture and noting the precise, unflinching stance of the woman. There was no panic in her body, only readiness and the subtle suggestion of control that only a Navy SEAL could exude. Ethan tried again. "I need to see your ID. Step back, ma'am." His voice was louder now, tinged with frustration. He stepped forward instinctively, reaching out to grab her arm. He thought he was in control. He thought he was prepared. But in that split second, all the confidence he had built since leaving boot camp dissolved. Raina's eyes narrowed slightly, reading his movement in real time. She didn't panic. Her training took over. Her hand shot out, capturing his wrist in a perfect grip, and she pivoted with his momentum. In one fluid motion, she brought him slightly off balance, enough to remind him that his actions had consequences, but not enough to harm him unnecessarily. Ethan's mind spun. He had expected resistance, yes, but this was instantaneous, flawless, and terrifying. His own limbs felt like they belonged to someone else, betraying him with every motion. Every instinct he had been trained to rely on seemed to fail in the presence of her precision. "Private Carver," she said again, voice calm but commanding. "Do you understand why protocol exists?" He shook his head quickly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I thought." She didn't give him a chance to continue. Instead, she shifted her stance slightly, maintaining full control over the situation while allowing him to regain his balance. It was a subtle gesture, almost imperceptible, but it communicated far more than words ever could. She wasn't just stopping him, she was teaching him, showing him the power of control over brute force. The other guards began to gather, forming a loose semicircle around the pair. Whispers spread immediately. A recruit had confronted a civilian and was somehow not in charge anymore. But the onlookers quickly realized something extraordinary. The woman standing there wasn't ordinary. Her calm, measured presence, her eyes scanning every potential threat while her body stayed relaxed, spoke of someone who had been trained to operate under the highest stress imaginable. Ethan tried to lunge forward again, an almost unconscious reaction fueled by adrenaline and shame. Raina moved smoothly, redirecting his momentum with a subtle shift of her hip and a gentle push of her shoulder. He stumbled, nearly falling, and for the first time he truly understood that he was outmatched, not physically but mentally, strategically. The hum of the bass, the distant engines, even the whispers of onlookers faded into the background. All Ethan could focus on was the woman in front of him. Her presence was commanding yet calm, lethal yet controlled. He could feel it radiating off her in waves, and it terrified him. He realized finally that the arrogance that had driven him to act so recklessly was no match for experience honed under pressure, under fire, in situations where hesitation could cost lives. Raina didn't speak again immediately. She let him process, let him feel the weight of his mistake. Then softly she said, "Instincts are a tool. Without training and discipline, they're dangerous. Control is everything." The words struck Ethan like a physical blow. He swallowed hard, trying to gather himself. His pride had taken the first hit, but his mind was beginning to comprehend the lesson. He had faced someone far beyond his reckoning, and the experience was humbling in a way that no boot camp exercise, no lecture, could ever achieve. Petty Officer Lujan stepped in finally, his voice authoritative but not harsh. "Private, step aside, and listen carefully. You're learning something far more important than rules today." He nodded toward Raina, letting the weight of the woman's presence underscore his point. Ethan took a deep breath, finally releasing the tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His chest heaved, not with anger but with a dawning understanding. He had just come face to face with someone whose experience dwarfed his own, and for the first time he realized that being tough wasn't about confrontation. It was about preparation, observation, and control. Raina Hale turned and continued toward the gate without another word, her focus unbroken. Ethan watched her go, a mix of awe, fear, and respect swirling inside him. The day that had started as an opportunity to prove himself had instead become a lesson he would never forget. A lesson in humility, in respect, and in understanding that real strength isn't measured by how loudly you assert yourself, but by how well you control the situation. By the time Ethan finally walked away, he was already replaying every second of the encounter in his mind, analyzing what went wrong, what he missed, and what he could learn. The whispers of other recruits followed him, but he barely noticed them. For the first time in his short career, he understood that the world he had stepped into was far bigger than himself, and that the next challenge, whatever it was, would require far more than ego to overcome. Ethan Carver's hands trembled slightly as he lunged forward, convinced he could assert control, convinced he could handle this civilian. He had misread every signal, every nuance of her presence, blinded by his arrogance and adrenaline. But within the span of a heartbeat, his overconfidence collided with a reality he wasn't prepared for. Lieutenant Commander Raina Hale didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, her muscles coiled like a predator ready to strike, and in that instant the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The air seemed to thicken as she assessed him, not just his movements but his intent, his weight distribution, the microsecond hesitation in his step. Raina had spent years hunting instincts that allowed her to anticipate actions before they fully formed. Combat was more than strength. It was precision, timing, and intuition, and Ethan was about to experience that lesson firsthand. As his hands grabbed at her arm, expecting resistance, expecting at least a moment of struggle, she moved with fluid efficiency. Her grip locked around his wrist in a perfect, unyielding hold. She pivoted, using his momentum against him, and in less than a second, Ethan was already losing control. The ground rose toward him as he stumbled forward, disbelief flashing across his face. He had been prepared to assert authority, to restrain a civilian, and now he was the one off balance, helpless under her subtle but absolute control. The senior guard, Petty Officer Lugin, had started toward them, but he paused, watching in stunned silence. He knew what was coming next, and the way Raina moved made it clear that this wouldn't be messy, but it would be decisive. Ethan's panic spiked, his mind scrambling. I can't. What? He stammered, unable to articulate the shock coursing through him. Raina's movements were almost mesmerizing in their perfection. Her pivot wasn't violent, it was surgical. Her hand on his wrist guided him like a marionette, redirecting his energy, destabilizing him without causing injury. She controlled every inch of the encounter, and every second that passed reinforced the truth Ethan was slowly beginning to grasp. He was outmatched in every conceivable way. Time slowed for him, each microsecond stretching into eternity. He felt the humiliation before he felt any physical discomfort. His ego, built over years of casual victories and moments of recognition, was unraveling faster than he could comprehend. He had been confident, cocky even, and now he was reduced to a fumbling, grasping figure under the quiet command of a woman half his size. The other recruits and guards had gathered now, forming a wide circle around the scene. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who is she? Did he just? Is he okay? Ethan felt their stares burn into him, a mix of concern and barely concealed amusement. But Raina didn't even glance at the onlookers. Her focus was entirely on him, an intense, calm focus that made every movement purposeful and every action carry weight. Ethan struggled, flailing slightly, trying to break free. Panic surged through him, but every effort was anticipated, every motion countered. He could feel his muscles screaming, his mind firing uselessly against her precision. It wasn't just strength he lacked. It was skill, experience, timing, and the kind of calm that only came from countless high-stress missions and life-or-death scenarios. The ground finally met him, and he hit it with a thud that rattled his senses. Pain flared in his palms and knees, but it was the shock of defeat that truly stunned him. He had thought himself capable, but in a single fluid movement, she had demonstrated a level of expertise he had never seen outside of movies or stories. And unlike a fictional hero, she did it without rage, without drama, just clean, controlled mastery. "Private Carver," Raina said, her voice soft yet unwavering, cutting through the cacophony of whispers and ambient noise. "Do you understand now?" Ethan struggled to speak, to respond, but his throat had gone dry. The words stuck in his mouth, swallowed by humiliation and awe. He nodded barely, his chest heaving. His mind raced through every moment, every mistake, replaying them in a brutal loop. He had been reckless, naive, and utterly unprepared for someone who operated on an entirely different level of awareness and skill. Petty Officer Lugin finally stepped forward, his voice authoritative but calm. "That'll do, Carver. Step back." He gestured toward Raina, letting the scene speak for itself. Ethan scrambled to his feet, still shaken, still processing. The whispers of onlookers were like a distant background noise to the revelation that had just unfolded. Raina's eyes softened slightly, but her posture remained firm. "Instincts are necessary," she said, her tone almost conversational. "But they're useless without discipline, training, and control. Learn that now, or you'll regret it later." Her words weren't a threat, they were a lesson, precise and unavoidable. Ethan's pride burned like fire, but beneath it, a seed of understanding began to take root. For the first time, he realized that real strength wasn't about rushing in, asserting dominance, or trying to prove oneself. Real strength was measured in control, awareness, timing, and the ability to act decisively while staying calm. And in that moment, he understood he had just glimpsed the pinnacle of that skill. The other recruits lingered nearby, some unable to look directly at him, others wide-eyed at the demonstration of sheer mastery. Yet Raina barely acknowledged them. She was focused entirely on Ethan, not as an opponent, but as a student of life who had just received a lesson in humility. Finally, she stepped back, releasing him completely. Ethan stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the gate. His knees were weak, his chest heaving, and his mind was a storm of shock and realization. The humiliation was sharp, immediate, but the lesson was sharper. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to remember this moment. He had been reckless, arrogant, and foolish, but he had also learned in the most intense way possible what it meant to face someone truly exceptional. Raina Hale turned to continue her path, walking with a measured grace that left no doubt about her authority. She didn't gloat, she didn't lecture. She simply moved forward, a living testament to skill, discipline, and calm mastery. Ethan watched her go, the sun glinting off her crisp uniform, and he felt a strange mixture of fear, admiration, and awe. As he stood there trying to process what had just happened, he realized that his journey in the Navy, which he had thought was about asserting dominance, proving himself, and showing bravado, was going to be entirely different. From that moment forward, humility would be just as crucial as strength, respect as important as ego, and discipline far more valuable than impulsive action. The whispers of other recruits continued, some chuckling softly, some shaking their heads in disbelief. But Ethan barely noticed. The memory of the perfect takedown, the calm authority, and the controlled precision burned in his mind. He knew he had been schooled in a way that would follow him forever. This was not just a physical defeat, it was a life lesson, and he understood it would shape everything he did from this moment on. Ethan looked around one last time, catching Petty Officer Lujan's subtle nod of approval. The senior guard didn't need to say anything. Ethan understood. He had been humbled, educated, and challenged, all in under a minute. And the woman walking away, Lieutenant Commander Raina Hale, had just become the standard he would strive to reach, though he knew he was nowhere near it yet. By the time he turned and walked toward the barracks, Ethan felt the weight of the encounter settle deep in his chest. This was only the beginning of his lessons at Coronado. The base, the recruits, and the elite operators who moved like shadows in the background would teach him more than he ever expected. And it all started with a single, unforgettable moment at the gate, the moment he realized he was outclassed in every way imaginable. Ethan Carver sat on the edge of the concrete curb, his palms pressed against his knees, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The encounter at the gate replayed in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Every movement she had made, the precision, the control, the calm, haunted him. For the first time in his short life, he realized how completely unprepared he was. And yet, the humiliation was only half the story. He didn't understand who he had just confronted. Petty Officer Lujan approached, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of calm authority. "Private Carver," he began, his voice steady, carrying the weight of someone used to delivering both praise and reprimands in the same sentence. Ethan's gaze lifted to meet the older man's eyes, wary, embarrassed, and still unsure what came next. "I think it's time you knew exactly who you just tried to restrain." Ethan blinked, uncertain. I don't understand, he stammered, his voice shaking. I thought she was just. Lugin raised a hand, cutting him off gently. She's not just anyone. Lieutenant Commander Raina Hale, Navy SEAL, Combat Master, one of the best close-quarters specialists in the entire Navy. The words hit Ethan like a freight train. His mouth went dry. The woman he had tried to confront, the person he had nearly humiliated himself in front of, was not a civilian, not a visitor, not a subordinate. She was someone whose reputation commanded respect even before she moved. He felt a flush of shame rise to his cheeks, burning hotter than the midday sun overhead. Raina approached, her posture relaxed but still carrying that unmistakable aura of authority. She stopped a few feet away from Ethan and crouched slightly to meet his gaze. "Private Carver," she said, her voice calm, measured, carrying both firmness and an almost imperceptible hint of empathy. "You followed your instincts. That's not a bad thing, but instincts alone are not enough." Ethan's mind raced, trying to comprehend what he had just learned. You're a SEAL?" he asked, disbelief tinged with awe. "Yes," she replied simply, her eyes steady. "And today you just learned a lesson that no textbook, no drill, and no lecture could ever teach." She extended a hand toward him, not to intimidate but to offer support, a gesture that was at once humbling and powerful. "Get up." Ethan hesitated, his pride warring with the undeniable truth of the moment. But finally, he reached out and allowed her to pull him to his feet. The warmth of her hand contrasted sharply with the cold shock of his embarrassment, grounding him, helping him process the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred. "Private," Raina continued, taking a small step back to give him space, "strength isn't just about physical power. It's about control, awareness, and discipline. You acted on impulse. You didn't assess the situation and you didn't consider the consequences. That's dangerous, especially in this environment where even a split-second mistake can be fatal." Ethan swallowed hard, trying to reconcile his inflated sense of confidence with the reality staring back at him. The pride he had carried onto the base gate had evaporated entirely, replaced with a mixture of awe, fear, and respect. I understand," he managed to say, though the words felt hollow even to him. Raina's eyes softened slightly, though her posture remained resolute. "Understanding is only the beginning. You need to internalize it. Discipline, training, and respect for others, these are what separate those who succeed from those who fail. Today, you learned that the hard way." The whispers of other recruits nearby had grown louder, but Ethan barely noticed them. He was too busy processing the enormity of the encounter. Each motion she had made, every adjustment of her stance, every subtle shift in weight had been a demonstration of skill, patience, and experience he could scarcely comprehend. She had dominated the situation without a hint of malice, without unnecessary force, simply through precision and calm authority. Petty Officer Lugin cleared his throat, bringing Ethan's attention back. "You're going to remember this moment, Carver. Let it sink in. Humility isn't a weakness. It's a strength. And right now, you need all the strength you can muster if you want to survive and thrive here." Ethan nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. He understood, in that instant, that his journey at Coronado would not be about bravado or appearances. It would be about learning, absorbing, and growing under the guidance of people who had been tested far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Raina Hale turned her attention back toward the base gate, her movements fluid, composed, and confident. "I have work to do," she said over her shoulder, her voice carrying without the need to raise it. "Remember what you just experienced. Let it guide you." Ethan watched her walk away, every step measured, deliberate, and controlled. The realization settled over him. He had not just encountered a superior officer. He had encountered a master, someone whose expertise and discipline could not be matched by ego or reckless action. He felt small, humbled, but also inspired. He wanted to grow, to learn, to one day approach that level of mastery, though he knew it would take years, perhaps decades, to even begin to comprehend the skills she displayed. The whispers of other recruits began to fade as they dispersed, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. He replayed every second of the encounter in his mind, analyzing each mistake, each misjudgment, and each moment where he had underestimated her. The lesson was clear. Respect, preparation, and control were more powerful than arrogance or impulse. As he walked back toward the barracks, Ethan felt a subtle shift within himself. The humiliation was still there, sharp and undeniable, but beneath it was a spark of determination. He realized that this encounter could define his entire career if he allowed it to. It could either crush him under the weight of shame or serve as a catalyst for growth, pushing him to become disciplined, aware, and capable. Later, in the quiet of his dorm room, Ethan replayed the events in his mind, step by step. Every detail mattered: the grip, the pivot, the calm in her voice, the way she anticipated his movements before he even thought them. He began to understand that being strong was not about asserting dominance. It was about controlling oneself and the situation, about observing, anticipating, and executing with precision. Petty Officer Lujan stopped by briefly, giving him a nod of reassurance. "You'll get there, Carver. Just remember what you've seen today. Let it shape you, not break you." Ethan nodded, the words sinking in. He felt a mixture of fear and motivation, understanding that the path ahead would be challenging but necessary. By the time he finally lay down to rest, the image of Raina Hale remained burned into his mind, calm, controlled, and unyielding. Her presence was a reminder that mastery was earned through discipline, patience, and unwavering commitment. And for the first time, Ethan truly understood the difference between instinct and skill, between pride and humility. That day, what began as a simple gate encounter had become a life-altering lesson. Ethan knew he would carry it with him forever, a reminder of the day he faced a Navy SEAL combat master and realized that there was a world of skill, discipline, and control far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The events at the gate replayed endlessly in Ethan Carver's mind. Every detail, the pivot, the grip, the calm authority, haunted him as he moved through his day. The humiliation still burned, sharp and relentless, yet beneath it lay a spark of understanding he had never felt before. This was more than a lesson in physical skill. It was a lesson in life, leadership, and humility. He had underestimated Raina Hale, and the cost of that underestimation had been immediate, brutal, and unforgettable. Later that afternoon, after the initial shock had subsided, Raina summoned Ethan to her office. The walk there was quiet, the tension between them palpable. Ethan felt every step under the weight of embarrassment, uncertainty, and awe. He had never been called in for counseling before, let alone by someone who could have crushed him at a whim. But curiosity, and perhaps a desire to redeem himself, kept him moving forward. Raina's office was simple, organized, almost austere. A few books lined the shelves, photographs of past missions subtly displayed, and a single desk commanded the room. She gestured for him to sit, her presence filling the space with quiet authority. Ethan obeyed, slumping into the chair with a mixture of relief and dread. "Private Carver," she began, her voice calm, but layered with a depth of experience that made every word land heavily. "What you did today, it could have gone very differently. You acted on impulse, with no understanding of what you were dealing with. Do you understand why that was dangerous?" Ethan nodded slowly, feeling the shame deepen with each passing second. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice small but sincere. I didn't think. I misjudged the situation." Raina's eyes softened slightly, though her posture remained firm. "Good. Recognizing your mistakes is the first step, but understanding them is far more important. The Navy isn't just about physical strength, Carver. It's about awareness, discipline, and respect. Without those, instincts alone will fail you, and sometimes that failure can cost lives." She leaned back slightly, her gaze distant, as if recalling her own experiences. "When I was your age, I made mistakes too. I acted without thinking, underestimated situations, and sometimes it almost cost someone's life, mine or a teammate. That kind of recklessness leaves a mark, and not always one you can erase. The key is learning from it, internalizing the lessons and growing stronger because of them. Ethan listened intently, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. He realized that this wasn't just about a physical confrontation at the gate. This was about mentorship, about shaping him into someone who could survive, lead, and excel in high-pressure environments. Every instinct, every reaction, every decision mattered. And for the first time, he understood how far he had to go. Raina's gaze returned to him, sharp and assessing. Let me be clear, Carver. Strength is not measured by how hard you hit, how quickly you move, or how loudly you assert yourself. True strength is control over your body, your mind, and your actions. Discipline isn't punishment, it's preparation. And preparation saves lives. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling the truth in her words like a physical presence pressing against his chest. He realized that his ego, which had driven him to act recklessly at the gate, had been a liability. Pride without knowledge, confidence without skill. It was a recipe for disaster. And yet, he also felt a spark of hope. If he could learn even a fraction of what Raina had mastered, he could transform himself entirely. Raina shifted slightly in her chair, leaning forward to emphasize her next point. You're going to encounter countless situations like today's, some far worse, some more subtle. Each one will test your discipline, your awareness, and your ability to make the right call under pressure. The key is to recognize when you're out of your depth and to adapt, learn, and grow. That's what separates those who survive from those who fail. Ethan nodded, absorbing every word. He could feel a shift within himself, an awareness that he had never felt before. He understood that the gate incident had been more than a lesson in humility. It had been a lesson in life, leadership, and the value of guidance from someone who had been tested far beyond what he could imagine. Raina's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'm not here to humiliate you, Carver. I'm here to teach you. You made a mistake, yes, but mistakes are only failures if you don't learn from them. Today, you've been given an opportunity to grow. Take it seriously. The words struck Ethan with the force of reality. He had spent so much time focused on proving himself, on showing that he was capable, that he hadn't stopped to consider what it really meant to be disciplined, aware, or prepared. This moment was more valuable than any drill, any training exercise, any lesson he had received in boot camp. And he knew it. Petty Officer Lujan, standing silently in the corner, gave a subtle nod, as if to reinforce Raina's message. Ethan could see it. He wasn't just being scolded or humiliated. He was being guided, shaped into someone better. And for the first time, he felt a genuine desire to rise to the challenge, not for pride, not for ego, but to honor the lesson he had just received. Raina leaned back, letting the silence fill the room. Tomorrow, you'll return to training, she said softly. But today, I want you to reflect. Think about what happened, why it happened, and what it teaches you about yourself. Humility is not weakness. It's the foundation of strength. Remember that. Ethan nodded again, feeling the words sink in deeper than any lecture he had ever received. He left her office quietly, each step heavier with thought, lighter with newfound understanding. The base felt different now, larger, more complex, more demanding. And for the first time, he recognized that surviving and thriving in this environment would require far more than brute strength or impulsive confidence. In the barracks later, he replayed the events repeatedly, breaking down every movement, every decision, every detail. He thought about the grip on his wrist, the pivot that sent him off balance, the calm authority in her voice, the patience that allowed her to teach rather than punish. Each memory reinforced the lesson. Control, discipline, and respect were more valuable than ego. That night, as he lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, Ethan realized something profound. The humiliation of the gate incident was temporary, but the lesson was permanent. It would stay with him, guiding his decisions, shaping his actions, and reminding him that true strength required far more than physical ability. It required wisdom, patience, and control. By the time the lights dimmed and the barracks fell silent, Ethan Carver felt a subtle shift within himself. The spark of arrogance had dimmed, replaced by determination and a hunger to learn. He had been humbled, yes, but he had also been given a rare gift, the guidance of a master, a glimpse into a level of skill and discipline that he could only aspire to. Tomorrow, training would continue. He would face drills, simulations, and challenges. But today's lesson, imposed at the gate by Lieutenant Commander Raina Hale, would remain etched in his mind forever. It was a lesson in strength, discipline, respect, and humility, and it was only the beginning of the transformation that awaited him. As he finally drifted into a restless sleep, Ethan carried one thought above all others. The encounter at the gate had changed him. Not through fear, not through punishment, but through the quiet, undeniable authority of someone who had mastered herself in her craft. And he knew, deep down, that he would never forget the woman who had taught him that control, not ego, was the true measure of strength. The following morning, Ethan Carver woke before dawn, muscles still sore from yesterday's humiliating encounter at the gate. His pride ached almost as much as his arms and legs, but now that pain carried a strange sense of purpose. For the first time, he realized that being a Navy recruit wasn't about ego, bravado, or rushing into confrontation. It was about preparation, discipline, and learning to harness instincts through training, and he was about to begin that process under Lieutenant Commander Raina Hale. Raina met him at the edge of the training field, her uniform crisp and her posture radiating authority. The early sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, glinting off the edges of her gear. She didn't greet him with smiles or reassurances. Instead, she surveyed him with the same sharp, calculating gaze she had used at the gate. Ethan felt a mixture of fear and excitement. He knew this session would be nothing like the standard drills he had endured in boot camp. "Private Carver," she said, voice calm but commanding, "today begins real training. Observation, precision, and control. Not strength, not speed, not ego. You're going to learn how to act under pressure without relying solely on instinct." Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. He felt a flutter of nerves in his stomach as he prepared to follow her lead. They moved to a corner of the training area where a small group of recruits were already warming up, practicing basic hand-to-hand maneuvers. The difference was immediately apparent. While the others focused on repetition, Raina emphasized awareness. Every stance, every step, every micro-movement mattered. She didn't just correct mistakes. She explained them, showing how tiny errors could escalate into life-threatening consequences. "Watch first," she instructed, directing him to stand slightly behind a fellow recruit practicing striking techniques. "See the weight distribution, the subtle shifts, the timing. You can't fix what you don't understand." Ethan watched carefully, his eyes narrowing as he tried to absorb every detail. At first, it seemed overwhelming. There was so much to notice: the angle of a wrist, the tension in a shoulder, the pivot of a hip. But gradually, patterns began to emerge. He realized that combat wasn't about brute force. It was about precision, balance, and predicting the opponent's movements before they fully committed. "Now you try," Raina said, stepping forward. Ethan's stomach twisted with nerves. He had never practiced under someone who demanded absolute attention and precision. Every instinct to rush forward, to strike hard and fast, was tempered by the requirement to control himself, to move deliberately, to think ahead. His first attempts were clumsy. He overextended, misjudged angles, and hesitated at the wrong moments. Raina corrected him quickly but gently, showing him how small adjustments could prevent mistakes. "Don't fight with force," she said. "Fight with control. Move with intention. Anticipate, don't react." Sweat dripped from his brow as he repeated the motions over and over, each correction building not only skill but awareness. Slowly, the awkwardness began to fade. His strikes became sharper, his stance steadier, his movements more intentional. And with every improvement, the fire of pride was replaced by a new feeling, competence born of discipline. The morning passed in a blur of exercises, footwork drills, and controlled sparring. Raina demonstrated advanced techniques, breaking down every motion into components that Ethan could absorb. The precision of her movements fascinated him. The way she could redirect an opponent's energy, maintain balance while exploiting weaknesses, and remain calm under pressure was almost hypnotic. Each demonstration was a lesson, and each lesson was a reminder of how far he had to go. At one point, Raina paired him with another recruit for controlled sparring. Ethan felt nervous, expecting to dominate, only to discover that his partner, guided by Raina's corrections, moved with unexpected fluidity. Every strike Ethan attempted was met with anticipation, countered with subtle redirections. He felt the sting of failure again, but it was different this time. The humiliation was tempered by the understanding that this was training, a necessary process to build skill and control. "Focus," Raina instructed, observing him closely. "Forget ego, forget speed. Control your body, control your mind, control the situation. You'll act decisively only when you're calm and aware." The session continued into the afternoon, each drill designed to challenge both his physical endurance and mental focus. He felt exhaustion creeping into his muscles, but Raina's presence kept him alert. She didn't yell or push recklessly. She demanded precision, and that demand forced him to rise above fatigue. Every correction, every subtle adjustment pushed him closer to the kind of awareness and control he had never imagined possible. By the end of the day, Ethan's body ached, but he felt a strange exhilaration. He had been pushed to the edge, tested in ways boot camp had never demanded, and yet he had survived and even improved. More importantly, he had begun to understand the philosophy behind the training. Control was more powerful than brute strength, awareness more important than instinct, and humility essential to growth. Raina walked him to the edge of the field, her expression calm but piercing. "Today was about observation and control. Tomorrow we'll build on this. You're learning more than techniques, you're learning to see, to anticipate, to survive. Remember, Carver, each movement has a consequence. Each decision matters." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He knew the journey ahead would be grueling. Mastery wasn't instantaneous. It was earned through repetition, reflection, and relentless discipline. But for the first time, he felt capable of rising to the challenge. He understood that the encounter at the gate was only the beginning. The real test was in applying these lessons, day after day, until instinct and discipline became inseparable. That evening in the barracks, Ethan replayed every moment of the day in his mind. He analyzed each strike, each foot placement, each movement she had corrected. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. He recognized errors in timing, balance, and anticipation, and with each realization he felt a spark of competence growing inside him, a confidence tempered by respect, discipline, and awareness. As night fell, Ethan lay awake, reflecting on the lessons of the past 2 days. The humiliation of the gate incident had been transformed into motivation. The training under Raina Hale was demanding, relentless, and precise, but it was also enlightening. For the first time, he understood that real strength wasn't loud, obvious, or forceful. It was quiet, controlled, and deliberate. Tomorrow he would return to the field, tired but focused, ready to absorb more. The seed of transformation had been planted, and with each lesson, each correction, each observation, Ethan Carver was beginning to shed the reckless arrogance of the past and embrace the disciplined, aware, and capable operator he had the potential to become. The encounter at the gate was no longer just a memory of humiliation. It had become a catalyst, a moment that had shattered false confidence and laid the foundation for real growth. And under Raina Hale's guidance, Ethan knew he would continue to learn, to adapt, and to transform, one disciplined step at a time. The morning air was sharp and biting, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby bay. Ethan Carver tightened his laces and adjusted his uniform, the nervous energy coiling in his chest like a live wire. Today wasn't another routine drill. Today was the test, a simulated high-stakes scenario designed by Raina Hale herself, meant to push recruits to the edge of their physical and mental limits. The briefing had been brief but intense. Private Carver, Raina had said, her voice steady and commanding. Today you'll encounter scenarios that will test your instincts, control, and awareness. Every decision has consequences. Fail to apply what you've learned and you will fail the mission. Succeed and you'll understand the power of discipline over impulse. Ethan felt the weight of her words press on him. This was no ordinary exercise. This was an evaluation of everything she had been teaching him since the gate incident. He had prepared physically through training, mentally by reflecting on every lesson, and emotionally by confronting the humiliation that had driven him to focus. But nothing could completely simulate what he was about to face. The scenario began in a simulated urban environment, an abandoned warehouse rigged with mock obstacles, sound distractions, and role players acting as hostile targets. Ethan's heart thumped in his chest as he stepped into the maze of crates and debris, every sense heightened. He remembered Raina's instructions: observe, anticipate, control, act decisively, but not impulsively. The first challenge appeared immediately. A hostile agent appeared from a side corridor, approaching with an aggressive stance. Ethan froze for a split second, memories of the gate flashing in his mind. He felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the same instinct that had once driven him to lunge at Raina. But this time, he forced himself to pause. Raina's voice echoed in his memory. Control your body, control your mind, control the situation. Ethan took a deep breath, assessing the target. Instead of charging, he shifted his weight, observing the agent's stance and approach. He anticipated the movement, adjusting his own balance and preparing to respond. When the simulated agent lunged, Ethan sidestepped, redirecting the momentum and safely neutralizing the threat using the technique Raina had drilled into him. The moment was electric. He had done it not perfectly but effectively. The thrill of success mingled with the awareness of every potential mistake. He realized that the lesson from the gate was alive in him now. Control and observation, not reckless force, were guiding his actions. The next few challenges escalated rapidly. Ethan navigated narrow corridors, crawled under low beams, and moved silently past simulated enemies. Each scenario demanded quick thinking and precision. When a hostile role player tried to ambush him from behind, he anticipated the movement, executed a controlled pivot, and disarmed the opponent without incident. For the first time, he felt the satisfaction of mastery tempered by humility. He was still learning, still imperfect, but he was improving in ways he had never imagined possible. At one point, the simulation introduced chaos, a series of loud alarms, smoke, and multiple threats converging simultaneously. Ethan's instincts screamed to panic, to act impulsively, but he forced himself to breathe, scan the environment, and prioritize. He neutralized the closest threat, retreated strategically, and repositioned himself to address the next target. Every action was deliberate, every decision informed by observation and training. Raina watched silently from a concealed observation point, her eyes sharp and calculating. She had designed these scenarios to be overwhelming, to push recruits beyond their comfort zones, and to reveal whether lessons had truly been internalized. She noted Ethan's progress, the way he moved with awareness, the way he balanced caution with action, the subtle improvements in timing and execution. He was no longer a recruit driven by ego. He was a student of discipline and control. The final challenge approached, a simulated hostage situation. A role-player civilian was cornered by two hostiles, requiring Ethan to act decisively without hesitation. He paused for a fraction of a second, assessing the environment, calculating angles, and anticipating enemy movements. Then he executed a series of precise maneuvers, neutralizing the threats in sequence while keeping the hostage safe. The moment the simulation ended, Ethan felt a rush of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had completed the test, not perfectly but successfully. Every movement reflected the lessons Raina had instilled: observation, control, anticipation, and disciplined execution. He realized that the humiliation at the gate, the rigorous training, and the countless corrections had culminated in this moment of achievement. Raina emerged from her observation point, her expression calm but approving. She approached Ethan, who was breathing heavily, sweat streaming down his face. "Well done, Carver," she said simply, her tone carrying the weight of genuine praise. "Today, you applied what you've learned. You controlled your instincts, observed the environment, and acted decisively. That's the foundation of real strength." Ethan felt a surge of pride, tempered by humility. He knew he had done well, but he also understood there was much more to learn. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice steady despite exhaustion. I won't forget these lessons." Raina's gaze softened slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Remember this feeling, Carver. This is what mastery feels like, not ego, not force, but control. Every decision you make from this point forward should reflect that mindset. The gate incident taught you what happens when you act recklessly. Today taught you the opposite." Petty Officer Lugin appeared beside them, nodding in approval. "You've earned this, Carver, not because you were fast or strong, but because you learned and applied the lessons. That's what counts in the field." Ethan exhaled deeply, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The transformation was becoming tangible. The nervous, impulsive recruit who had confronted Raina at the gate was gone. In his place stood someone who understood the value of discipline, control, and awareness. He knew he was still far from mastery, but he had taken the first real steps toward it. As they walked back toward the barracks, Raina spoke quietly, more as a mentor than a commanding officer. "The lessons today are only the beginning. Real-world scenarios will be unpredictable, chaotic, and dangerous. You'll be tested again and again. The goal is to internalize these principles until they become instinct, so you can act effectively under any circumstances." Ethan nodded, absorbing every word. He realized that the journey ahead would be long, demanding, and relentless. But for the first time, he felt ready to embrace it, not out of pride, not out of ego, but out of understanding, respect, and determination. By the time they returned to the barracks, Ethan's exhaustion was complete, but so was his sense of purpose. The encounter at the gate had been transformed from a moment of humiliation into a catalyst for growth. The training, the challenges, and the lessons imparted by Raina Hale had given him a foundation he could build upon, step by step, day by day. As he lay on his bunk that night, reflecting on the day's events, Ethan felt a quiet confidence he had never known. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and challenge, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware. He understood that the path ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he was no longer the same recruit who had confronted a Navy SEAL at the base gate. Tomorrow would bring new drills, new lessons, and new challenges. But tonight, Ethan Carver slept with the knowledge that he had taken the first real step toward mastery. Under Raina Hale's guidance, he was learning not just how to survive, but how to excel, and that realization filled him with a sense of purpose stronger than pride, ego, or fear. The sun rose in fiery streaks over the Coronado base, painting the tarmac with gold and crimson. Ethan Carver stood at attention, his uniform crisp, his posture rigid but confident. Today wasn't another drill or controlled exercise. Today was a demonstration, a culmination of everything he had learned under the exacting guidance of Lieutenant Commander Raina Hale. Every lesson, every correction, every moment of humiliation and growth had led to this point. The assembled recruits and instructors formed a semicircle, murmuring quietly as they observed him. Ethan felt a strange mixture of nervousness and resolve. This was his moment, not to prove himself to the recruits, not to satisfy ego, but to demonstrate control, discipline, and the mastery of skills he had fought to internalize. Raina approached, her steps measured, authoritative yet calm. Her presence alone drew attention. The other recruits instinctively straightened, sensing the aura of someone extraordinary. She stopped a few feet from Ethan, her eyes scanning him, not critically but with the focused attention of a mentor assessing progress. "Private Carver," she began, her voice carrying across the tarmac, "today you will demonstrate what you've learned. Not for me, not for the base, but for yourself. Remember everything I've taught you. Control, observation, anticipation, execution. One mistake, one lapse in focus, and the lesson is incomplete. Are you ready?" Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady, infused with the calm confidence he had never known before. The demonstration began with a series of complex combat scenarios. Ethan moved through simulated hostile environments, neutralizing targets, disarming role players, and navigating obstacles with a precision and calm that stunned onlookers. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and efficient. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He observed, assessed, and executed with quiet authority. A hostile role player charged from a concealed corner. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, anticipating the movement. He redirected the attack with a controlled maneuver, using the assailant's momentum to bring them safely to the ground. The crowd murmured in surprise. This wasn't just skill. It was mastery born of discipline, practice, and the lessons learned under Reina's watchful eye. The next challenge involved multiple adversaries converging simultaneously, creating chaos. Alarms blared, smoke filled the training area, and role players shouted simulated threats. Ethan's instincts screamed to panic, to act recklessly as he might have at the gate. But the training had rewired him. He paused, scanned the environment, assessed threats, and acted decisively. Each move neutralized the danger without unnecessary force or risk. Every step, every pivot, every strike reflected the principles Reina had instilled. Control over impulse, awareness over reaction, discipline over arrogance. At one point, a hostage role player was cornered, simulating a life-or-death scenario. Ethan's mind raced as he calculated angles, considered escape routes, and prioritized safety. His body moved with precision, neutralizing threats sequentially, ensuring the hostage remained unharmed. It was the ultimate test of all he had learned, and he passed it flawlessly. The crowd erupted in applause as the final scenario concluded. Ethan, breathing heavily but composed, stood tall, sweat on his brow, muscles aching yet controlled. He realized with a profound clarity that he had transformed. The nervous, reckless recruit who had confronted a Navy SEAL at the gate was gone. In his place stood someone tempered by discipline, sharpened by guidance, and aware of both his capabilities and limitations. Reina stepped forward, her expression calm but approving. "Private Carver," she said, her voice carrying both pride and authority, "today you demonstrated not only skill but mastery over yourself. You controlled your instincts, applied discipline, and acted with awareness. That is the mark of someone capable of true excellence in this profession." Ethan felt a surge of emotion, pride tempered by humility. He had earned this moment not through ego, not through force, but through dedication, discipline, and relentless practice. The lessons of the gate, the hours of grueling training, and the mentorship of Reina Hale had culminated in this achievement. Petty Officer Lujan stepped forward, smiling slightly. "You've come a long way, Carver," he said. "Not just in skill, but in mindset. That's what we look for in the field. Someone who can think, react, and adapt without letting ego or fear interfere." Ethan nodded, the weight of the words sinking in. He understood that the journey wasn't over. Mastery wasn't a destination. It was a process, a daily commitment to learning, observing, and improving. But today, he had taken a monumental step. Reina's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Remember, Carver, strength without control is meaningless. Confidence without discipline is dangerous. You've learned to combine both, and that combination is what makes an operator exceptional. Never forget it." As the recruits and instructors began to disperse, Ethan felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The humiliation of the gate incident, the grueling hours of training, and the intense scrutiny had all been worth it. He had faced his weaknesses, confronted his arrogance, and emerged stronger, more aware, and capable. Later that evening, Ethan stood alone at the edge of the base, watching the sun set over the water. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, reflecting off the calm bay. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from reckless arrogance at the gate to deliberate mastery on the training field. He thought about Raina Hale, the Navy SEAL who had taught him not through intimidation, but through guidance, discipline, and example. He felt a quiet gratitude. The lessons she imparted went beyond combat. They were lessons for life. Observation, awareness, discipline, humility, control. These were principles that would guide him long after the drills ended, long after the missions were over. They were the foundation of true strength. Ethan knew the path ahead would be filled with challenges. He would face tests, both physical and mental, in environments far more dangerous and unpredictable than the simulated scenarios. But he also knew he was prepared. The lessons had taken root, shaping not just his skills but his character. He would approach every challenge with the same awareness, discipline, and control that had carried him through today's demonstration. As night fell, Ethan returned to the barracks, exhausted but fulfilled. He lay on his bunk, reflecting on the transformation he had undergone. The nervous, impulsive recruit who had confronted Raina at the gate was a memory, a reminder of what he had overcome, and a benchmark for how far he could still go. Raina's mentorship had changed him, not through fear, not through punishment, but through teaching, guidance, and the patient application of skill and discipline. He had learned that true strength was quiet, controlled, and deliberate, and that mastery over oneself was the foundation for any success, whether on the battlefield or in life. In the days that followed, Ethan Carver continued his training, each session reinforcing the lessons he had learned. But the transformation was now complete in spirit, if not in every detail of skill. He had faced his fear, embraced discipline, and emerged capable, aware, and ready. The encounter at the gate, once a moment of humiliation, had become the turning point of his life, the moment that defined the path to mastery. Standing at the edge of the field one last time, Ethan looked toward the horizon. The journey was far from over, but he felt ready. He had faced the ultimate challenge, mastering himself under the guidance of a Navy SEAL combat master. And as the sun dipped below the bay, Ethan Carver knew one thing with unwavering certainty. He would never forget the lessons, the training, or the woman who had transformed a reckless recruit into a capable, disciplined operator. And in that quiet moment, as the waves lapped against the shore, he understood the truth that Raina Hale had instilled in him from the very beginning. Strength without control is nothing. Control with discipline is everything. Ethan Carver, once a clueless recruit, had become something far greater, a student of mastery, a practitioner of control, and a recruit ready to face whatever challenges awaited him with courage, precision, and unwavering focus. The story of the gate, the humiliation, the relentless training, and the transformation would stay with him forever, a testament to the power of discipline, mentorship, and the relentless pursuit of excellence.